Hello, I'm Jan Szrawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we're talking about something political leaders seem addicted to, like a late-night cigarette: Russian resets. Every few years, someone decides it's time to clear the air with Moscow, only to discover, surprise, the air is even more polluted than before. Pressing the reset button with Russia has become something of a familiar American pastime. You would think by now they would have realized this habit isn't working, but no, the temptation of a fresh start with the Kremlin always proves to be too strong, every single time. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
You start having cards.
This moment in the eyes of many will go down in infamy. It is when relations between Ukraine and its strongest and staunchest supporter, the United States, collapsed. And now Donald Trump's special envoy had this to say, much to the gathered audience's chagrin.
Very candidly, they brought it on themselves. The Ukrainians, what I mean by that. Look, when we were in the Oval Office last week on Friday,
the political game surrounding Ukraine is focused on the so-called mineral deal with the United States. Ukraine wants solid security guarantees. The US believes that its interest in Ukrainian raw materials are enough. It is difficult not to point out, in the view of some, that Russia is the side who benefits much from this feud. Some are pointing out that there may be an underlying attempt at a reset of relations with Russia, should the war be ended. What would this mean for Europe? A rapprochement between Moscow and Washington would change the entire region's security architecture. Many European states have moved away from Russian resources, for example, and it is uncertain whether they would move back. What's more, many European nations have started to undertake significant efforts to rearm themselves, should Russia's hungry gaze fall beyond Ukraine.
500 million Europeans are begging 300 million Americans to protect us from 140 million Russians, who have been unable to handle 40 million Ukrainians for 3 years.
This wouldn't be the first time that the US has tried to reset relations with Russia. One of the most memorable cases was when the first Obama administration attempted to do it. Instead of a reset, however, in the end there was a steady rise in harsh rhetoric. Many critics of the Obama administration point to the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia as the final result of this policy. History shows that Russia may not be as eager for a reset as consecutive US administrations may hope.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. Washington seems endlessly committed to hitting the reset button with Moscow, despite each fresh start inevitably ending like a bad Hollywood sequel. Bigger explosions, higher stakes, and even worse reviews. The latest actor in this tired drama is none other than President Donald Trump, who recently suggested freezing military aid to Ukraine. But Trump's reset is just another rerun of a historically bad American habit. Let's rewind to George H.W. Bush, who signed groundbreaking arms treaties with Moscow, while Russia simultaneously launched wars in Transnistria and Chechnya. Then came Bill Clinton, who invited Russia into the G8 club and NATO dialogues. How did Moscow respond? By doubling down on violence in Chechnya and furthering authoritarianism back at home. George W. Bush tried another reset after 9/11, banking on Putin as a partner against terrorism. Putin responded warmly until he didn't, openly challenging US influence and invading Georgia. Barack Obama then famously promised his reset with Russia would usher in cooperation on Iran and nuclear arms control. Initially promising, this reset spectacularly collapsed when Russia annexed Crimea, invaded eastern Ukraine, and meddled brazenly in Western elections. Every reset Washington has offered was met with cynicism from Moscow. Each diplomatic olive branch has consistently been used by the Kremlin as cover for deeper aggression. Sanctions, typically weak or half-hearted. Military support for allies, like Ukraine, often delayed or conditional, providing Moscow with ample room to escalate conflicts unchecked. The pattern is unmistakable, yet inexplicably repeated. But it is not just the US. France's Emmanuel Macron famously tried to reset relations with Russia back in 2019, hoping for constructive dialogue and improved security cooperation. And what happened? Exactly what you'd expect when negotiating with someone whose favorite negotiation tactic is invade first, discuss later. Germany, too, with its long-standing policy of Ostpolitik, spent decades believing economic engagement with Russia would eventually yield political stability and mutual respect. Instead, they got Nord Stream pipelines that exploded both literally and figuratively in their faces. And now, even amidst Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, whispers of yet another reset are echoing through Washington. Advocates argue dialogue with Moscow is unavoidable. They say it's necessary for peace and stability. Dialogue is crucial, but it must be based on reality, not wishful thinking. Putin's Russia hasn't shown interest in dialogue. It has shown interest in conquest, misinformation, and destabilization. The Kremlin doesn't reset, it recalibrates how much deception the West will accept this time around. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Mark McNamee, co-founder of the Ukraine Business News Network. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thanks for having me.
So America's reset with Russia are no longer speculation. It apparently is a policy direction now. Do you think this is going to work this time? Because, plot twist, it never did when it was done before, and it was done before multiple times.
Right. So there's truly no reason to think it would possibly work this time. I mean, Putin has been explicit, and this is something that not only the United States, but the Western world has consistently underestimated Putin's resolve, Putin's intentions. He's been explicit that, as he said numerous times, Russian civilization is incompatible with the Western world. So it depends on what we mean by reset, right? So we had multiple iterations of reset. As you noted, every single one has failed for obvious reasons. This iteration will fail as well. It just depends upon what the actual goals of reset mean. The goals of reset, the most recent iteration under Obama, was basically to try to improve relations after Russia had invaded Georgia. Again, another imperialist war, as we've seen imperialist wars now with the 2014 invasion of Ukraine, then the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So this is now trying to, at a minimum at least, they're just trying to reset relations, right? So the aspirations this time around of a reset are far more minimal compared to what they were trying to do, say, 15 years ago. But another sort of common denominator here, whether back under Obama in his first term, currently, or any of the other resets, by the way, historically, sort of a common denominator here is underestimating, right, what Putin is, the threat that Putin poses to the Western world broadly and to the United States. And so this is likely going to fail yet again. And then we should just really, at this point, be thinking about what is the U.S. and the Western policy response when this iteration of reset, when it inevitably fails. What do we do then?
Do you think that this policy, as it was stated by General Keith Kellogg a while ago, is not even entirely sincere? I'm asking because we had this recent exchange between Marco Rubio, Elon Musk, and Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. And one response that was interesting was Mr. Rubio, who said that, well, you should be thankful for the U.S. involvement because otherwise Russia would be at Poland's doorstep. I am quoting from memory, but that was the overall tone of that statement. So that indicates that the US administration knows that Russians, if they had their way, they would have conquered all of Ukraine. So they seemingly don't have any illusions about this. So do you think that this reset could actually be just skin deep, or otherwise it could just be a ploy to get some concessions here and there, but overall that the US administration knows full well that a complete renewal, revival of relations with Moscow is impossible at this stage?
Right. It's the right question, and your interpretation is exactly accurate. I think the U.S. administration, maybe not Trump himself, maybe not Elon Musk himself, but I do believe Trump's administration is adept enough to understand, as Rubio's comments indicate, that, yes, Russia, there is no real working relationship with Russia. So I think we just need to focus on what does reset actually mean. This time around, it really simply means let's start talking again. Right. And so we don't, obviously there's a lot of noise, and it's very discouraging to see how much pressure Trump administration has put on Zelensky and his team, denying the military aid, the votes in the UN, etc., the numerous things we've seen over the last few weeks here. And of course, no pressure, no concessions demanded of Russia amid all this.
Which in itself is a questionable approach, isn't it?
Of course, and that leads to question: is there really art of the deal here? Is Trump really working 6 steps ahead of everybody else? I would say definitively he is not. And by the way, he has a track record in his first term with North Korea, with China, with Mexico and Canada, with Afghanistan. There was no art of the deal. He failed. Varying levels of failure in every single one of those negotiations. So there's no reason to think in this iteration of negotiations, in the highest stakes diplomacy really of our generation, that he's doing something way beyond the consciousness of everybody else watching here. So again, but the point is, cutting through all the noise, what the U.S. is likely really just trying to do, and what they have said repeatedly, is just start talking to Russia.
Well, they also indicated they want to start talking and doing business. And now this is the part that is more questionable, because there are reports that perhaps the Nord Stream pipeline could be on the table, that there could be some sort of American consortium taking part of the profits, cooperating with Russia's Gazprom. So that's one thing. There was, I think, a statement from Mr. Rubio that there are great business opportunities to be had, not referring to anything specifically, but also. And then there were the overtures made by Moscow, who said that, we also have rare earth minerals and other resources. But, so do you think that this could be a problem, that, transactional approach could mean, okay, we see these business opportunities, we are prepared to sacrifice other opportunities and other countries or other interests in order to get at these opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, what I would say is that we are a million miles away from those things still where we are, right? I mean, we're just, the Western world, or the United States specifically, is just starting to speak to Russia. And then add to the list that you mentioned, which is also discouraging, the discussion of the rare earths, not only in Russia, but then talking about joint investment in rare earths in occupied regions of Ukraine with Russia jointly. So these types of proposals, of course, are extremely discouraging, but they have absolutely no traction until you get to an actual legitimate peace deal, which we're not even anywhere near a ceasefire, based upon the comments coming out of the White House itself. And there's no indication that Putin wants any ceasefire. The only partner that's actually indicating an interest in a ceasefire truly is Ukraine here. And so where does this go after that? You're exactly right. This is a transactional approach. It's a valueless, unprincipled approach, and this is the ultimate concern. You are throwing away the Western order, which is the foundation is based upon shared values and a shared humanitarian outlook of the world, which Trump is, of course, indicating very, very clearly. And by the way, he has for 40 years his interest in moving towards a valueless, unprincipled, might makes right world in which, how he envisions it, he, Putin, Xi Jinping become the Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin of a previous generation. And then all three of them are fantasizing about that every night in order to bring about that world and make the decisions above and beyond the heads of the 8 billion people on this planet. And he believes that transactional approach will be somehow beneficial to the U.S. And this is already blowing up in front of his face.
So one thing that you've mentioned was Xi Jinping, and this could be one of the keys to understanding this approach. The U.S. may wish to repeat the so-called, what is being referred to right now as reverse Nixon. So, the Nixon strategy was trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China, the Soviet Union, of course, not Russia at the time. But back then the situation was rather different. Do you think that this could be accomplished today, except that it would be Russia and not China, which would be essentially driven away from its ally to benefit the U.S. interests there? Or is it just a folly, something that's not possible?
No, I think that's most definitely what Trump is trying to do, and this is also impossible. So first things first, it does seem very clear that that is what he's trying to do. And by the way, he tried that in his first term. That's why he appointed people like Michael Flynn, like Rex Tillerson, who had a pre-existing strong relationship with the Kremlin. Failed completely. Trump blamed it on the deep state at the time. Now in his second term, he's clearly trying to do something similar. The problem is this will fail miserably for a number of reasons. First and foremost is that he just simply believes his personal relationship with Putin, he can then separate Putin and Xi Jinping, which China and Russia have a lot of reasons to be together currently right now. The focal point being their shared animosity towards the United States and the West in general. But Xi Jinping and Putin have developed a very strong personal relationship the last 15 years. Why Trump would believe that he can get in the middle of that personal relationship because of his minimal relationship with Putin is hard to understand. That's at the personal level. Then you get into the structural factors. At the time when Nixon and Kissinger split up the Soviet Union and China, they didn't split them up. They're already split, right? They had an artillery duel on their border. The Soviet Union at the time had almost 600,000 soldiers on the border with communist China. Mao Zedong himself at the time said Soviet imperialism is worse than capitalist imperialism. From his own lips, he essentially said the Soviet Union is worse and is more of an enemy than the United States. It was easy. They were already split apart. It was easy to formally bring in China into a relationship with the United States. And that took a lot of course, extraordinary diplomatic, political acumen and skill by two of undoubtedly the most adroit political operatives in U.S. history, in Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Now you're trying to do this when you consider the personnel of Donald Trump, individuals with extremely limited diplomatic experience, like Peter Hegseth at Department of Defense, like Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor. Rubio has some diplomatic experience, but nothing comparable to what the U.S. had back in 1971 and 72, or what the Russia team has currently, which these gentlemen have 25, 30, 40 years of hard-earned, extraordinarily strong diplomatic experience, playing with the most difficult players around and high-profile players around the world.
Mark McNamee was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Saudi Arabia ahead of the high-stakes talks with the United States. Kiev wants an air and sea ceasefire and claims it is ready to sign the minerals deal.
The United States has been pushing for a swift end to the war in Ukraine ever since Donald Trump returned to office. Washington has been engaging in direct talks with Moscow for the first time in years, while also halting military aid and intelligence sharing with the Ukrainian side. The talks in Saudi Arabia will be the first formal meeting between the US and Ukraine since Zelensky and Trump's argument in the Oval Office last week. The Ukrainian president has said he is not directly involved in the talks, but that Kiev's delegation is headed by the country's foreign minister, the presidential chief of staff, and the defense minister. The US is represented by Donald Trump's envoy to the Middle East, the US Secretary of State, and the US National Security Advisor. The Ukrainians are likely to propose a peace plan that includes a ceasefire in the air and sea as an initial step. Washington, meanwhile, has expressed high hopes for the meeting.
A report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says that Ukraine was the largest importer of arms globally between 2020 and 2024. The United States was apparently responsible for over 40% of global arms exports.
According to the report, Ukraine's arms imports grew almost 100-fold between the 2015 to 2019 period and the 2020 to 2024 period. Kiev received almost 9% of the world's arms imports, with the largest chunk of weapons for Ukraine coming from Washington at 45%. Germany came second and Poland was third. Overall, 35 countries sent arms to Ukraine in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion. What's more, the US has also strengthened its role as the world's leading arms supplier, with its share of global exports surging to 43%. Russian weapons exports have dropped to a much more modest 7.8% on the other hand. Despite receiving such substantial amounts of arms, Ukraine has also been busy boosting its domestic military production. Around a third of all the weapons the country needs are produced at home.
Denmark has joined the group of countries which have expressed willingness to send a peacekeeping mission to Ukraine. So far, however, no specific plans exist, as such a mission would only take place following a ceasefire.
European leaders have been floating the idea of sending a peacekeeping force to Ukraine once the demarcation line has been agreed upon. Denmark's foreign minister is the latest official to say her country supports providing military presence in Ukraine to promote stability if necessary. One of the strongest supporters of this notion is French President Emmanuel Macron, who proposed the idea at the emergency summit in Paris in February. The United Kingdom, Italy, Latvia, Germany, Canada, and even Australia have also said that they were ready to contribute to such a mission. Romania has said it could serve as a transit point for the Allied troops. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that European boots on Ukrainian soil could be one of the most effective ways of pressuring Russia into peace. He has noted, however, that such a mission should not replace Ukraine's possible NATO membership.
Romanian far-right presidential candidate Călin Georgescu has been blocked from running in the upcoming May rerun of the presidential elections. Georgescu is suspected of having ties to Russia.
The decision of Romanian authorities to remove Georgescu from the ballot comes after months of speculation. The country's constitutional court had annulled the previous election in December last year, following a first round in which Georgescu was victorious. The decision was made on the grounds of undeclared financing connected to Georgescu, who said he had zero financing and suspicions of foreign interference. The former candidate was stopped by the police last month and indicted on charges related to incitement to actions against constitutional order. The annulment has been criticized by officials such as US Vice President J.D. Vance, who called it a violation of free speech. Georgescu himself has been a highly controversial figure in Romanian politics. He is known for his staunch anti-NATO and anti-Western statements.
And finally, we have arrived at the east-splaining portion of our show. The Russian exclave of Kaliningrad bears both strategic and cultural importance to Moscow. Nestled between Lithuania and Poland, it is often host to many Russian military drills, and it has often been said that it could be used as a staging ground for a potential assault on either of its neighboring countries. However, this strip of land also has a rich history and is a crossroads of many influences.
The Kaliningrad of today bears less resemblance to its past forms than one could expect. Annexed by the Soviet Union after the Second World War and repopulated with Russian settlers, it was transformed into a symbol of Russian culture over the decades. Its German heritage, while still present in some of the main city's architecture for example, has been greatly eroded. It was even renamed from East Prussia when it belonged to Germany to refer to Mikhail Kalinin, one of the Soviet Union's leaders. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia did not give the exclave up. It is a vital Baltic Sea port for Moscow, essentially its only one other than St. Petersburg. It often serves as a staging ground for various Russian drills. Some of Moscow's largest exercises of military prowess meant to intimidate neighboring countries take place here. The message is clear: this is as much a part of Russia as Smolensk or Volgograd. Poland and Lithuania are aware of the threat posed by the Russians in the exclave. In the event of an attack, there is little doubt in Warsaw that Kaliningrad would be used as a staging ground, most likely to attack the Suwalki Gap and pincer Polish territory along with strikes from Belarus, for example. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the border of Kaliningrad has become heavily fortified, and economic and cultural exchanges have all but dried up.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.